How's that done? Sure. Okay. Yeah. So this is speaker. All right. So who is that? Is that Michael? So I'm starting with Michael now. So if you don't know, I think he has issue with the time difference between US and Nigeria. I think you told them at that. Okay, so good morning, everyone. So this is the second panel on African athletes and international sport competitions. So we had the first thing on the panel yesterday, and today we are having the second panel that talks about African sports and African athletes. So today we have three presenters. The two of the presenters will join us online, while we have one of them here in our midst physically. So but before we go on, I would like to introduce our three speakers for today. The fourth presenter is going to be Michael Gennaro. Michael Gennaro is so Michael Gennaro is he has his his PhD from the University of Florida in 2016. He His research interest includes sport and leisure in West Africa. More specifically, his work examines how boxing informed and transformed masculinity and conceptions of empire during the late colonial period in Nigeria. So his dissertation was on boxing in post-colonial Nigeria. We have two other presenters. The first one is going to be so the first one is going to be Olushola Ogunubi. The title of his work is Over the Bar, the Making of Nigeria Soccer Diplomacy in Africa and Beyond. So Dr. Olushola Ogunubi, research fellow at the Center for Gender and African Studies based at the University of the Free State, South Africa. Previously, he had lectureship position at the School of Social Sciences, University of KwaZulu-Natal between 2011 and 2014. He is currently a research fellow at Clarkson University, Ottawa. His research interests include regional power studies, comparative foreign policy, and African soft power. He has published in several journals, including the Politicon, South African Journal of International Affairs, Journal of Contemporary African Studies, Global Society, Journal of Developing Societies, and International Journal of Culture, Politics, and Society. The top presenter is Victor Olaoye. He's working on, he's presenting on Yankee Heroes, a history of Nigeria's first World Cup participation. Victor is a doctoral candidate at the Department of International Relations, International History and Politics, Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, Geneva, Switzerland. His research interests include African medical history and biographical studies and sport history. So I don't know if Dr. Ogunubi is online with us. Let's check those who are there. So just to save our time, I just have a chat with Michael Gennaro now. He's about to log in. So to save the time, I will ask Victor Olaoye to go ahead with the presentation. Thank you.
Good everyone. I am Victor. I'm going to discuss the first participation of the Nigerian national team at USA '94. Before I start my presentation, I would like to look at the overview of Africa in sporting events. I would like to engage the place of Africa in global sports events. And the first thing I will engage in my work is to look at the nexus between colonialism and African participation in global events. In other words, I will try to look at the effect of colonialism in African participation. When the World Cup commenced in 1930 in Uruguay, North African team was in attendance, and this is and this was all connected. This was connected to the fact that as of 1930, most African nations were still under colonial rule, and it was in the year 1934 that Egypt became the first African nation to participate in FIFA World Cup. Because as far as 1922, Egypt had already had partial independence from Britain. And apart from colonialism, we cannot just allude Africa's late participation in the World Cup due to colonialism. Just like what Ajayi said, that colonialism was an episode. So after colonialism, so what else? So we have bad leadership and other factors that prevented a country like Nigeria with so much talent to participate in the World Cup very late. in the year 1994. For instance, in 1977, when Nigeria was on the verge of playing its World Cup against the captain of Tunisia, Nigeria lost the sole ticket, the African sole ticket to Tunisia due to bad leadership from the then Nigerian Football Association, now known as NFF. The Nigerian team in the 70s consisted of players from Rangers Football Club of Enugu and Shooting Stars Football Club of Ibadan. These two football clubs were the most successful Nigerian club side as of the 1970s, and 1970s was the nadir of Nigerian domestic football. But we were unable to secure a World Cup slot due to mismanagement from the Nigerian Football Association, now known as NFF. When I was studying the earliest president of African teams, I noticed one thing, despite the fact that they were not too impressive in their exploits the World Cup, but I noticed some form of upset. When Tunisia went to 1978 World Cup, they created an upset by beating Mexico 3-1. At Espana 1982, West Germany was the champion of Europe, but shockingly, they lost. They lost to the Desert Warriors of Algeria. In 1990, Cameroon defeated the then world champion Argentina by a lone goal. But this was just upset until the 1990s, when some African nations began to move out of the enclave to shock the giants from South America and Europe. Before I move on, I engage in the surface of sport history in Nigeria, and there is a gap. And the gap is African athletes do not write their autobiographies. I'm against USA 94, except Sunday Olise, no member of the team has written his autobiography. Olise wrote his autobiography about 2 years ago, audacity to refuse. Apart from Sunday Olise, another Nigerian international Segun Odegbami wrote his autobiography. So it makes it difficult for sport historians in Nigeria to have secondary sources with what we get to write about the issue of sport in Nigeria. As a result, we rely solely on newspaper cuttings and interview. So I move on to the crisis of the World Cup. It is always common for African teams or teams from developing nations to have a series of crises before any major tournament, and Nigeria was not an exception on the eve of USA 94. One of the crises was that the coach, Clement Westphal, was a serious loggerhead with the Nigerian Football Association. In fact, he was on the verge of being relieved of the job on the eve of USA 94. But as we all know, Westphal had strong connection with the power that is, with the likes of Babangida, Augustus Aidomu, the next in command to the president. Not only that, we have injury scared. We have newspaper reporters that were scary. We have stories like Westphal released own team, own quotes, that is, the authorities and other players were not in support of the team he was about to release. Injury hits Eagles camp. Westphal and Joe Bonfrey, that is assistants, were at war. Another problem, Chidi Nwanu factor. Chidi Nwanu was not part of the Nigerian team to Tunisia 94, but when Nigeria played Tunisia 94, the coaching crew noticed a gap in the team. And what was the captain of the team, Stephen Kechi, was already aging, and he was battling a series of health crises. And the coach had to introduce Chidi Nwanu, who had a good season with Beveren Football Club of Belgium. He moved to RC Anderlecht from Beveren, and some senior players of the team were not in support of the inclusion of Chidi Nwanu. So as a result, before Nigeria could play the first match, the team was already divided. And newspaper reportage of the Nigerian national team to during and before the World Cup was not encouraging. There is some form of race issue in the, for instance, most reports on the pages of newspapers from the Western media emphasize the physicality of the Nigerian team. And it's a paradox because after the end of the tournament, Nigeria was adjudged the second most entertaining team behind the Samba Boys of Brazil. But funnily enough, newspapers from UK, US were emphasizing on the strength of the Nigerian team. And I remember when Nigeria walloped Argentina in Azerbaijan about 6 or 7 years ago, Iwobi nutmeg Mascherano we scored 4 beautiful goals. But the reports were like the Nigerians were so strong, too strong for the Argentines. So I engaged the issue of race in African football. And another thing we need to consider is that newspaper reports about Nigeria was although they were debutants when they were going to USA 94, but they've already gathered a scary CV from the opponents. For instance, the court of people Arigosechi expressed fear about the prospect of meeting another African team. He said that when they played Cameroon in 1990, they were full of confidence, but they shockingly lost to the indomitable Lions of Cameroon. He said, but now we are facing a stronger Nigeria team and they had champions of Africa. Besides, our players have already built an intimidating CV. That's why the fact that they were debutants in the World Cup. George Niji, as at 1994, was known as one of the best 7 in the world. As at 1995, he was adjudged the best 7 in the whole of Europe when he was flying his trade with Ajax Amsterdam of Poland. Sunday Oliseh moved from FC Liège to Reggiana, therefore becoming the first Nigerian to play for a Syria side. Amunike from Julius Berger of Lagos to Zamalek of Egypt, he moved to Portuguese giant, Sporting Lisbon. And another player, Okocha, was blessing the German league in the colors of entry Frankfurt with his top-line skills. While Uche Okechukwu, as at 1994 on the eve of the World Cup, was already the best defender in the whole of Africa. In other words, even after the African Cup of Nations in Tunisia, he was voted the best defender in Africa, while Rashidi Yekini, as of 1994 before the World Cup, was #1 striker in Africa. 1992 Nations Cup in Senegal, he was the highest goal scorer. In 1994 Nations Cup in Tunisia, he was the highest goal scorer. 1993, he was the best player in Africa. So, before the World Cup, Nigeria did not enjoy the privilege of debutants. All lights were already on them. And Westhoff, I need to engage another debate about Coach Clemens Westhoff, who took out the Nigerian national team to the World Cup. Coach Westhoff, as we all know, was the first foreign manager to qualify Nigeria to the World Cup, and under his tutelage, Nigeria became an African power, one of the best teams in the world. Although it was not the best, it was not the first foreign manager to qualify Nigeria to win a major laurel with Nigeria. As of 1980, the Brazilian coach Otto Gloria won the Nations Cup for Nigeria at Surulere, Lagos. But public opinion about Westhoff was the best coach that ever tinkered in the national team. But based on my interaction with primary data, among his players, they never trusted Westhoff. Even Sibikeshi described him as a trader, not a coach. According to Sunday Oliseh, Westhoff knew nothing about football. What he knew was just to talk to the players, encourage them. But they all trusted Bonfrejo, who was his assistant. And let me move to the World Cup effect. After the World Cup, Nigerian players began to move to bigger clubs in Europe. Kanu moved from Ajax to Inter Milan. Oliseh moved to Dortmund. Taribo moved to Inter Milan and AC Milan. Tijani replaced Finidi at Ajax. After the World Cup, let me quote Amokachi. We became the talking point. Clubs now wanted to sign Nigerian players, and little children made us as idols and legends. Not only that, because of the Super League performance of the Nigerian team, FIFA and CAF increased the slots of African teams from 3 to 5. And more importantly, the performance of Nigeria at 1994 changed the way the whole world saw Nigeria. Before the World Cup, the whole world had a single story about Nigeria as a whole. In Nigeria of drug smuggling, even at that time, the United States of America had already placed embargo on Nigeria because of war, because of drugs. And not only that, we were under military junta that did not respect fundamental human rights. And the height of it was the killing of Ken Saro-Wiwa in 1995. But football changed all that. They began to see Nigeria from a drug-friendly country, drug smuggler, to a footballing country. I end my presentation with a quote from Sunday Oliseh. Oliseh, he said, and I quote, "Success in football was desperately needed in the 90s. Our country had a drug smuggling problem at the time. And being a drug nation, quote, Nigeria had become being a drug nation had become the way the Americans saw us. Thanks to our exploits at FIFA World Cup. For once, the world saw us in a different light. They loved our style of play and the entertainment we brought along." Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation. So we now have a market general joining us now. Don't believe still able to access Dr. Olu. So as sent him big, but I've not gotten a response from him yet. So it also clearly I joined us before we had the discussion. So General is going to join us. I said he is an associate professor of history at Seminole State College of Florida. His research interest, as I said earlier, is on boxing. He has co-authored 2 collections, one with Said Aderitor entitled Sport in African History, Politics and Identity Commission. He is currently completing his manuscript on Nigerian boxing history. So welcome, Dr. General, for your presentation. You have 15 minutes for your presentation, please. Thank you.
Sorry, say that again. How much time do I have?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. I'm gonna try my best to be as quickly as I can. I feel I have too much time to do the title of my piece today is One Big Night for Dick Tiger, the fight over Nigerian independence. And I just woke up, so just be patient with me, everybody. I missed the timing of everything, unfortunately, but I'm excited to be here today, so thank you. So I wanted to start off by telling you about one big night at the Liberty Stadium in Ibadan. On the 10th of August, 1963, in Nigeria, it became the first sub-Saharan African country to host the World Boxing Championship fight. This would be the third and final match between the former champion, American Gene Foreman, and the then middleweight champion of the world, Nigeria's very own Richard Ahechu, who had fought under the brilliant name Dick. In the first fight between these two boxers in San Francisco in 1962, Dick Tiger had won the title on a points decision. In the second fight, which took place in February 1963 in Las Vegas, Tiger was unable to defeat Foreman convincingly, and it ended in a draw. And the second fight produced no clear winner, so boxing terms, Foreman could dispute Tiger's title. Tiger was still the champion, but he was unable to defeat Foreman convincingly. So the third fight was set up for August of 1963 in Nigeria this time to determine who would be the middleweight champion of the world. As one newspaper put it, quote, "History, when it comes to be written, it will record that on the 10th of August 1963, will witness the first World Boxing Championship ever to be staged in Africa. And it will go down in history that the Liberty Stadium, Nigeria, was the chosen venue among all the world stadiums to be considered." But as you can see, this was talking about me. I'm writing this history about this in this prophetic moment of wisdom from the newspapers in 1963. But despite this very poor attempt at humor on an early morning on a Zoom call, the fight was about a lot of things beyond simply just a world championship boxing fight. For Dick Tiger and the Nigerian government, there was a lot more at stake at winning this fight in 1963. The Nigerian government actually sponsored this fight financially, and I'll get into those reasons in a minute, but they spent $7 million in US funds for this fight. So for Dick Tiger himself, this was an opportunity for him to be a national hero and was heralded as the model Nigerian to be projected to the world. He was going to showcase Nigeria as a modern country worthy of respect, and his victory would help to hopefully unify the citizens of Nigeria under one national identity. Keep in mind that Nigeria, again, had just gained full independence in 1960, just 3 years ago, but it lacked a cohesive national identity, something that people today still argue. So both Dick Tiger and the Nigerian government and the officials understood that a victory here was a good showing and proved to the world that Nigeria and its newly elected federal republic government was an independent success story on the continent, despite some recent bad press that I'll get into in a moment. This match was intended to present a positive image of Nigeria worldwide as a modern, progressive, and forward-thinking country, and this would bring foreign investment and publicity directly to the country. But in addition to this, Nigerian leaders also hoped that a large national sporting event of this kind, bringing the world to Nigeria, would help to internally unify the nation's different ethnic groups and halt what they called tribalism. It was also hoped that Tiger's victory in Nigeria would answer the national question that they called it then, and some still call it now. This was a particularly pressing question in 1963, and a lot of effort was put on by the Nigerian government and sporting officials to try to craft a Nigerian identity that they could share using either the cultural, historic, or artistic endeavors of Nigerians themselves. Tiger's fight, however, was the first time, and it was different. It looked at sport, not the indigenous art or history, for inspiration to answering the national question. And lastly, just prior to the fight, the political infighting within the country, specifically in the Action Group, which was the Western region's ruling political party, led to violence in the halls of the Western Parliament. And this violence came to be known as the Action Group Crisis. And this was widely broadcasted across the world, humiliating Nigeria and showcasing an internal divide in ethnic politics for the world to see. So the federal government hoped that by paying for this fight, hosting it in Nigeria, and as in Ibadan itself, in the Western region, that the fight itself would bring an increasingly dividing nation back together. The fight was used as an attempt to not only unify the country, but to do so under the banner, image, personality of Dick Tiger, using the sport and him as a tool of nationalism instead of history and tradition. So today I'll be presenting basically the final chapter of my upcoming book. I'm sorry for the shameless plug, Champions of the World, Boxing, Masculinity, and Empire in Nigeria, 1930 to 1966, which might be published by 2024 if my toddler twins give me time to resubmit the manuscript. As you can see here, Dick Tiger is on the right, and he's standing beside another boxing world champion from Nigeria, Basi. And of course, I hope that you have heard of him, and if you have not, we can always discuss him later. But this is a talk about the championship moment that Nigeria had because of Dick Tiger. So I'm sure I don't have to tell everybody that Nigeria achieved independence on October 1st, 1960. And as the most populous country on the continent, with large and newly discovered oil reserves in the Niger Delta, the economic and political prospects of the country were indeed very high. And as an independent nation, Nigerians expected themselves to hold a leading position in African and world affairs, and others held similar expectations. And Nigeria was dubbed by itself and others as the giant of Africa. So their example of independence was supposed to be a success story for other aspiring African nations to follow, not to succumb to violence and ethnic tensions, but to show how a wide variety of peoples could come together under one banner. However, the decade of the 1960s, the one in which this fight takes place in 1963, saw large amounts of corruption, violence, and several coups d'etats, something I don't have to explain to everybody here. And as you know, it also ends with a civil war, killing upwards of 3 million people. So as Tony Falola and Matthew Heaton described about the 1960s, they said, quote, "The underlying cause of all of the problems that Nigeria has experienced in the 1960s has been experienced since then is often called the national question. What is Nigeria? Who are Nigerians? How does a country go about developing a meaningful national identity?" And as we're going to see, this problem of Nigerian identity and unity was front and center when the government sponsorship of the fight between Dick Tiger and Gene Fulmer in 1960. And one of the major reasons for the government sponsorship of the third fight was attempting to curb the developing regionalism and corruption on the federal level, what they then and sometimes now described as tribalism or regionalism. Generally speaking, and in reality, the federal government and the constitution that it rested upon at independence were a delicate foundation, and it was divided by regions, but regions dominated by ethnic groups. So the troubles that Nigeria faced were multifaceted and can partly be explained by the divisions within the regions and political parties dominated by ethnic ideals. And that's something we can discuss later. But for our purposes, tribalism was front and center in a continuing issue, that it was a discourse in the newspapers throughout the decade leading up to independence, and even more so afterwards. And as we're going to see, unfortunately, it was ultimately unsuccessful in trying to curb it. So others have noted that when Nigeria became an independent sovereign nation in 1960, in many ways, It was a state without a nation. So how to create a national identity that was, to a certain extent, still is problematic. Well, the Nigerian government tried in this case to capitalize on international sporting fame of Dick Tiger and his world championship status to craft a national identity. Boxers have historically represented the body politic, the spirit, and the strength of the nation. He's always introduced as Dick Tiger of Nigeria. And so for many people, and many people around the world, the most celebrated and visual face of a Nigerian was actually Dick Tiger. So in order to understand why the government then was willing to not only host, but pay millions of dollars to host this fight specifically, we need to understand how this increasingly unstable political climate that I've been describing came to a head in 1962 with the Action Crisis. So long story short, since I only have about 12 minutes and I'm probably going to go over, and so I just stop me whenever I'm getting too close to that. So Chief Awolowo moved from being the Western Region Premier to the national politics. He left Samuel Akintola to replace him. A disagreement ensues between the two between him and Akintola's willingness to work with other political parties and thus other ethnic groups. And Awo and his group want Akintola removed, and they tried to vote him out by removing him as the Western Premier. Akintola's supposed removal sparks violence in the Western Region House Assembly floor. On May 25th, 1962, rival factions attacked one another and closed the legislature. Here's a description of from one person about what happens on that day. The House Assembly met at 9 a.m. and after prayers, Mr. E.O. Oke, a supporter of Chief Akintola, jumped on the table shouting, "There is fire on the mountain." He's then proceeded to fling chairs about the chamber. A supporter of Chief Akintola seized the ceremonial mace and attempted to club the Speaker of the House. Several members continued to throw chairs. The opposition joined in, and there was such disorder that the Nigerian police released tear gas to clear the house. When the tear gas is lifted and they tried to assemble again to remove Akintola of the vote, fighting once again broke out. Several ministers are injured, and several more people are stabbed. It prompted the newspaper to call this violence a descent into the wild, wild west. For several days, there is violence, rioting, property damage, lawlessness. All of this, according to the newspapers that came as far away as the New York Times. This was worldwide news and a very big light on Nigeria. So in an effort to get to the bottom of this problem in the wild, wild west, a special commission of inquiry, the Coker Commission, made an investigation into the Action Group and Awo's running of the party with hopes of discrediting and dismantling their grip on the Western region's power. Although it wasn't the aim, the commission did find that several members of the AG misappropriated millions of pounds, essentially looting the Western region of money for development in its 1963 January report. Investigations. How many more minutes?
2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. Oh man, I'm gonna have to get through all of this. So we can see why that when all of this comes through, the Nigeria fight between Dick Tiger and Gene Fulmer wants to get rid of this terrible feeling in the air. On top of that, we have a very big problem. Nigeria loses a match in early 1963 against Dahomey. Sorry, it ties with Dahomey, and because of this, the outcome dominates the national sports papers as a huge national shame that a country the size and stature of Nigeria should ever lose to and tie with Dahomey. According to Bonar Ekedem, who's the sports commentator of this piece, justifies how other countries see Nigeria as, quote, big for nothing, and that this echoes in this truth, the quote, the country in the words ought to make Nigeria shudder with shame. So Nigeria was often blamed when losing sporting matches, especially when it came to football, that they could not come together as a team ethnically. And so here's where Tiger comes back into the picture. Nigerians want to look good again on the world stage, and they want to bring back the country under one national banner. And so Dick Tiger, who became champion in 1962, now has the ability to determine where the fight is going to be. This is an effort to reclaim national prize and to capitalize on Dick Tiger's championships They call it the Fight at Home movement, and it dominates newspapers for several months as the federal government tries to negotiate to bring Tiger to Nigeria. Dick's supporters all over the world do not, however, think in terms of the wealth the champion is likely to accumulate in his next fight. They are clinging to his prowess as the only means to project Nigeria's personality across the two hemispheres. We were very clear. This is about Nigeria. The fight actually does happen in Nigeria, and Dick Tiger okays that fight. And as you can see, the fight itself, as this AG crisis is going on, Dick Tiger is also front page news, and he's often discussed in those terms as well to build momentum for this fight. So because we are running out of time, and I've already talked almost 12 minutes and haven't told you who's won the fight yet, so it's about time that we actually get to that part of this. So on the fight night itself, what we see is Dick Tiger gets a lot of congratulations, a lot of well wishes from a lot of people. As the fight goes on, the one thing that I want to just discuss quickly is that there is an advertisement put in the newspaper that day of the fight that discusses, and it's from Chief Akintola himself, that I've unfortunately cut off the title of this, but it's towards a noble and rewarding venture of nation building. And so this was seen as a nation building effort for Nigerians to become one nation under Dick Tiger, as Nigeria can become the giant of Africa once again. In this big fight, Dick Tiger beats, pummels, and knocks out, technically, Gene Fullmer to become world champion once again, convincingly. And so he is able to then, for a very briefest of moments, unite Nigerians together. Chief JDJ held a party and said, "Bring your own dame and avoid disappointment," because it was an all-night celebration all across the country. But this feeling of Nigerianness doesn't last. One problem is they lost the TV film, and so there was no recording of this. To this day, there is no recording of this fight. No one can actually watch it. Awo goes to jail for 10 years, which also sets off ethnic tensions once more in the country 1 month after this fight. And then Dick Tiger loses his title just a couple of months later by a very corrupt decision at the end of 1963, denying him and Nigeria a chance to capitalize on his fame and championships, or having more championship fights in Nigeria itself. So the fight itself was an attempt to try to move Nigerian politics to that next level, and to try to bring people together and away from the regionalism and tribalism. But we all know the ending of this story. It absolutely doesn't. And unfortunately, the country dives into civil war a few years later. And when that does happen, Dick Tiger is once again world champion in 1966. But this time, he fights for Biafra. He joins their army, and he is now Dick Tiger of Biafra. And that is where the next chapter of my dissertation, turned into manuscript, will pick up the story. Thank you so much. I apologize for going over time.
All right, thank you for your So, we have our top data. Let me check this. So that means we are not going to join us, probably because of the time difference between Nigeria and Canada, having some issues. So while we are waiting for you to join us, let us go to the question and answer session. But before we do that, the two papers here really discuss Nigeria from the perspective of sport, saying how sport has been a tool for nation building, has been a tool to protect Nigeria for its image in the international community. So in Victor's paper, he told us how people in the China world started to Nigeria from the boxing recognition due to the performance of Nigeria Super Eagles at the 1994 World Cup. So the same thing with Daniel's paper. He also talks about how the Nigerian politicians use sport as a tool for nation building. and they also try to use sport to bring people together. So while we are waiting for Stop Center, we like to take some few questions and see and answer those ones before we join our short panelists. Any question from the developer? Any question or contribution? So those who are joining us online, if you have questions, kindly simplify by raising your hand. We will get in touch with you and get your questions. Okay. Please, before you raise a question, kindly introduce yourself and let's know you better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Tokumbo Salako. And about the paper with in reference to the USA 94 Nigerian Eagles, I want to say that this is a good paper. In fact, it broadened my horizon because I've read about the participation of Nigeria at the USA 94 before now. But I want to ask, what are the factors that helped Nigeria as a team? Despite the fact that there was a lot of corruption in NFF, there were issues with the coach in relation with the Nigerian Football Association as at then. What are the factors that really helped Nigeria to be able to defeat Bulgaria, defeat Greece, and even went far into extra time before losing out to Italy at the 1994 World Cup?
Thank you for the question. If you look at the Nigerian team,
So let's check it for two questions at a time so that
Concerning the USA 94, yeah, my name is Ayodele Samson. So, fine, the Super Eagles did well at the 1994 FIFA World Cup, but they crashed out at the second round. Do you think they crashed out due to inexperience or lack of unity? Because you mentioned that there was a kind of disunity in the team before the Mundial. So I want to know.
So let's go to the one
you've raised an important comment. I think the team was able to get to the height it got to in 1994, not only because of the tactical approach of the coach. What the coach lacked tactically, he had it in unearthing talent. So after Nigeria lost in 1989 in his bid to qualify for 1990 World Cup, Westerhoff was appointed, and when he was appointed, he traversed the nook and cranny of the country. He looked for young players and mixed them with experienced players, the likes of Amokachi from Rancha Bis Kaduna, Samson Siasia. They were mixed with the experienced players of the team. So I would say individual brilliance did it for the team. But it got to a stage when individual brilliance could not lead the team. And that was when we met a more experienced Italian team and a team with an experienced coach in the person of Arrigo Sacchi. Like, no matter how we criticize Westerhoff, it might not be perfect tactically, but when it comes to discovering talent, give it to him. One of Nigerian journalists, they interviewed him, like, what's your philosophy about defense? He said something that surprised me. He said that when he got appointment as a Super Eagles coach, the first thing he studied was Nigerian history, culture. He said he studied the Hebrews. He said I should check his team that all these defenders except the late Tidikeshi were all Hebrews. Ben Iroa, Chindi Wanu, Uche Okechukwu, Uche Okafor, they were all Hebrews. He said he had learned in history that the Hebrews by default were fighters. They fought the Nigerian state during the Civil War. They were resilient and they were good when it comes to trade, they love money. He said at times when he saw that the likes of Chukwu, all these defenders were weak, he said, okay, Chukwu, if you keep these strikers at bay, if you don't allow them to score you as defenders, I will give you $1,000. You know, the Igbos, they like money. He said they like money. So that's why he made sure that all his defense were full of Igbos. But all these factors could not take Nigeria beyond African glory and beyond second round when we met a more tactical and a more experienced Italian team. So that was the factors that took Nigeria to the level we got to during the World Cup. So, your question.
Because this due to inexperience or due to
Yeah, inexperience was a big factor. If you watch the match against Italy, Sunday Oliseh was asked to match Roberto Baggio, who was then the best striker in Europe, European Footballer of the Year, and Oliseh was a 19-year-old boy, and they all committed schoolboy errors. Look at the first and second goal. The second goal was a needless tackle from Iguafon that led to the penalty. That was the inexperience from the players and bad tactical approach from the coach. Our three strikers were out: Daniel Amokachi, Rashidi Yekini, and Amunike. We needed a striker up front to score more goals, but instead the coach introduced Mutiu Adepoju and the late Thompson Udia. So in the attack, we were dead, and the Italians capitalized on it. So I would say we lost due to inexperience, wrong tactical approach, decision in the team. In fact, before the match against Italy, Westerhoff knew we might lose that match. He had already moved his back out of the team's hotel and moved to another hotel in order to avoid face-off with the team, with the players after the match. Even before the match, some senior players of the team were involved in exchanging blows with Westerhoff, according to autobiography of Sunday Oliseh. So all these factors work against Nigeria. We already lost before we started our opening match.
My question is for the second presenter. The sighting of the match between in Ibadan. I want to know if, because as at that time when the match was sighted, SL Akintola was the premier of Western region. And we all know that it was very unpopular in the Western region. I want to ask, the presenter said that the Nigerian government sponsored the fight, maybe as a tool for nation building. I want to know because it was sited in Ibadan, and Ibadan was the capital of the Western region. And given the unpopular nature of SL Akintola in the Western region, would the match also be, I want to know if SL Akintola also has a vested interest in the match, maybe to promote its image instead of a national objective, now a kind of subnational objective of a PR for himself. Because I saw some of the newspapers and I saw SL Akintola posting with Dick Tiger. So I want to know if there is a kind of a domestic agenda on the part of SL Akintola.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for the question. I unfortunately didn't time my presentation well enough, and so I didn't get into a lot of the other parts of this that I wish I could have. But so originally the fight is negotiated, and it's actually scheduled to be done in Lagos. It's actually supposed to be at the race course in Lagos, which is it was supposed to be in the newspapers. It's discussed, but it's also discussed elsewhere between government officials that this is intentional, that this is going to be the site of independence. So where the flag ceremony is done in 1960 at the race course, it's going to be, that's where we're going to hold this fight as well too. Again, the nation comes together in Lagos. But after the AG crisis, the Nigerian government, and it's actually in consultation with the other regions as well, they decide to hold it at the Liberty Stadium instead in Ibadan. And this is, I haven't found discussions of this to be sure, so I can't 100% say that Akintola had somehow paid for this or made it happen. But I can tell you that he definitely pushed for this to be done in the Western region. And he actually, and the government also wants it to be there as well too, right? So you have to remember that the head of the national government, right, is from, he is a Balewa, and he's, a Muslim from the north. So you can see that he wants to bring unification as well too, and he sees this as a really good opportunity to bring not only the country to the Western region to showcase this and to show that, look, everything's okay here, but also to bring the world to show that everything is okay here too. So it's both, right? It's both Akintola working and trying to make this happen, right? And as I showed you, there's an ad that he creates, and he also I didn't get a chance to read it, but since we have some time right now, I can actually read you his reply. Give me 1 second here, and I can show you. This is what Akintola said. This was in my presentation. I apologize for going so fast. This is what he said. He says, quote, "I would like to express on behalf of the government and the people of Western Nigeria our sincere gratefulness to the federal government for the spirit of sportsmanship, cooperation, and selflessness which has prompted this fight to be held at Liberty Stadium. Western Nigeria takes great pride in playing the host to the hundreds of people from the north, the east, the federal territory of Lagos, and the many foreigners and others overseas." So he recognizes that the federal government, which is put up the majority of the money, each region put up about $1 million each to also host this. So the eastern region's paying money to host it in the west. The northern region's paying money to host it in the west. So all of the other regional governments actually signed off on this as well too, understanding the importance towards nation building for this reason. And the Nigerian government actually sponsors and gives civil servants the day off and gives them free ride and discounted train fares so that people could actually get to the Western region. In fact, there's a 5-day holiday in the Eastern region so people can go watch the Tiger fight. So it's a much larger effort. So I wouldn't say it was just Akintola trying to politically maneuver, which he was actually really good at. So I wouldn't doubt that he was really trying to push this, but I would definitely say that it wasn't just him who wanted to change the image and show that everything was okay. There was a lot at stake for the national government and for the regional governments to also play into this for not only foreign investment, but also to really become what Nigeria wanted to become, which was the giant of Africa.
All right, thank you. So we have a question from one of our online participants.
Oludayo Balogun. Yeah, that is made sense for the business.
Okay. Let's see.
I think James Yeku has already typed this.
Maybe let's get the point of bio cost, then start together.
Okay, all right.
And
Yeah, first.
okay, let's do everything together. Say,
View the whole
Yeah, you sound well.
Okay, James Yeku's question.
okay,
You got the question now.
Yes.
Yeah, you need to yeah.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me, please?
We can hear you.
All right. All right, thank you. My name is Bidemi Oladayo Balogun, and my question is to Victor Olaoye. So, Victor Olaoye, thank you very much for your paper. Very interesting. And at some point, I lost my connection. So please don't mind me if you already mentioned what I'm about to ask. So, in the course of your presentation, you mentioned how the World Cup 1994 opened the opportunity for Super Eagles players to be playing abroad, especially in Europe. And as you know, 1994 was an era when racism in football was at its peak. Nothing has really changed as we speak now, though. During that period, it was quite awful. But my question is, for players who moved to Europe, how did racism, what effect did racism have on their career? How did it shape it or, reshape it? And how did they contend with it, in Europe? That's the question I want to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. Let me start from Bidemi question. I think one of the cultural these players witnessed when they first moved to Europe, apart from the weather was high rate of racism. And we should not forget that was in the 90s when racism was still at its peak in Europe. I think based on my readings and my interaction with all these players on live interviews, I noticed that racism itself peaked or increased their performance. Like it made them perform in order to shush their critics. Okota once said that when he went to Germany that he first realized that he was a black guy, and he said he responded to racism by dribbling all of them, by dribbling them in a merciless way. I think there was a match between Eintracht Frankfurt and Karlsruhe, and the great Oliver Kahn was the goalkeeper of Karlsruhe. Okocha dribbled all the stadium, dribbled Oliver Kahn mercilessly without respect. Even to today, Oliver Kahn said he has not even recovered from the shock of the dribble. And Jurgen Klopp, the coach of Liverpool, said that goal can be judged as the best goal in the history of Bundesliga. So it increased the performance of the players, that they responded to racism through their performances. The same with Sunday Oliseh when he went to Belgium. The coach, Robert Wasage, kept on reminding Oliseh and Ikpeba that they were black, that if they have not bought them from Nigeria, they will be struggling, eating 3 times a day. So Oliseh said all these experiences made him to fight, like being a negotiant in Nigeria and a minority in Nigeria. It was like from a minority in Nigeria, he went to Europe suffering the same fate of a minority. So all these things inadvertently made him to work harder and made them to reach the peak of their career. So to them, racism was like a blessing to all these Nigerian players in the 90s. So James' question, okay, can I? So okay. Okay. Do you think Nigerian soccer in the current moment held back by an aspiration for this past or golden era, given the much transformed nature of the game itself? And I think at times we always we are over ambitious about what we expect from the national team or the current national team, because every teams of the world, including European club side, they usually have their golden era. Barcelona has left their golden era. Juventus, AC Milan, now they are not what they used to be. The same thing with Nigeria. I think it would be unfair if we are expecting Nigerian team to perform the same level with what we had in the 90s. It's a phase, and we have left the phase. It's not left for us to build on the team. And besides, the game of football in 1994-95 it's not what we are playing now. In 1990s, when we were playing Dutch style of football, the emphasis was on weak play, but now things have changed. And yes, and even in Africa, we no longer have small teams, what we normally call minnows in football. Small teams even came to Nigeria to defeat Nigeria, and all the things wouldn't have happened in the 90s. So what I'm saying is that the game of football has moved beyond what we see think it is. So we should lower our expectation. Well, I think Super Eagles is a team in progress. So that's my response. James Yeku.
So I think we had a question to second presenter from James Yeku. Michael, can you see the question online on the screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, can you please respond to it? You're muted. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. You're muted. Okay.
Am I back? Am I back?
Yeah.
My apologies. Yes, I can see the question. You have to love the technology first thing in the morning here. So again, I apologize for showing up late. I didn't take in effect the time change. So it's 6 in the morning for me when when I got the message when I finally woke up. So a little bit tired still. So yes, my research doesn't go into the Bash Ali era. So my research initially, my dissertation that I wrote in 2016 ended with Hogan Bossi's World Championship victory in 1957, which was another example of this nationalism that we're talking about that helped to bring Nigerians together towards independence. And so he won the World Championship before independence. What you saw today was Dick Tiger after independence using his championship similarly twice more to put Nigeria on the map. But I have not moved beyond 1971 and the ending of the Civil War.
Okay.
For me, like that's sort of where I stopped, because from that point onward, we see a big shift. And so from my research, boxing is never the same in Nigeria. After 1971, the new military government that comes into force, like many other military governments, sees boxing not as important as team sports in nation building. And Nigerians themselves become very much not interested in boxing because of Dick Tiger. And in many cases, many of the boxers that I spoke to, when I asked them who's their favorite, Nigerian boxers or favorite boxers, they would say, oh, Muhammad Ali and Hogan Bossi. And then I would say, okay, what about Dick Tiger? I don't want to talk about Dick Tiger. So there's actually still to this day many people who haven't forgiven Dick Tiger or grew up in households where their parents hadn't forgiven or just wanted to discuss Dick Tiger either. So many people see boxing as something very divisive and something to be avoided because it creates rebels like Dick Tiger. And so football becomes the national sport in more ways than one after the Civil War, and boxing falls on its own. If you read my work elsewhere, boxing is as popular or more popular than football. And it's the sport that brings Nigeria the most fame and recognition internationally up until this era. And then afterwards, it sort of falls off. But it has these sparks and like fireworks that happen every once in a while. And Bash Ali is one of those fireworks where a Nigerian is able to command real attention because of their ability to win away from the continent. So Bash Ali is one, Jerry Okorodudu is another one. So we start seeing these coming up afterwards. But yes, there's very much excitement with that. So unfortunately, I can't answer more questions towards that, but that's sort of where my research ends.
All right, thank you for the response. Do we have any more questions in the house? No. So I think Bidemi is raising his hand. Are you trying to ask another question?
Yes, actually, well, not question, but I mean maybe some clarification from Michael.
Okay.
In the course of his presentation, he mentioned that Tiger lost a match I think in 1963 to an unfair decision. So I just wanted to make sure I got him right. Is that what he said? That the decision that leading to his defeat was unfair? I'm not sure I got him correctly. I just wanted to be sure. Thank you.
Yes. So in December of 1963, so this fight happens in August of 1963 in Nigeria. He wins. It's a big party. Everything's great. And his very next fight is against a man named Jerry Giardello. And one of the criticisms was that Dick Tiger, as the champion, should have dictated where the fight was. He should have had the fight again in Nigeria or somewhere else on the continent to help promote Africa, if not Nigeria itself. But he chooses to fight in New York, if I'm remembering correctly. Hold on, let me look up where it was. Yeah, so he He ends up fighting in New Jersey at Atlantic City, and he fights against a man, Joe Girardello. And Girardello eventually is murdered, and it's suspected that the mob murders him. And boxing in the United States was mob run. And in fact, Dick Tiger is brought before the US government in an investigation over corruption in boxing based on this fight. So this 1963 fight that he loses against Joe Girardello, where he loses his championship, his middleweight championship, is actually a question of whether it was a corrupt fight. Did Tiger lose on purpose? Was the referees paid and the judges paid off? He doesn't get knocked out. He loses by a points decision. And when you look at the overall picture, right? Nigeria is trying to build this national presence, and they're using Dick Tiger to do so. But they use the fight film, the sentencing of Awo, and then Dick Tiger losing this fight. The fight sort of leaves everybody's memory, and the good feelings that it made didn't continue unless if Tiger had continued winning and continued fighting on the continent, that would have sparked a lot more joy and spread, it would have done a lot more. But yes, he actually loses about 3 months later.
All right, thank you. So thank you, the two presenters. So I just have a one or two questions to have the two of you. So starting with Victor, in your presentation, you mentioned that in 1978, qualifying for the Argentina World Cup, that Nigeria could not qualify due to the corruption in the NFA and the management of Nigerian sport. So looking at it, like 20 years after or till now, can we say that, from 1994 that Nigeria qualified, was there no corruption in the NFA at that time compared to what happened in 1978 qualification? Or do you think that there were other things that were put in place that made Nigeria to qualify for the 1994 World Cup and subsequent World Cup? So to Michael Gennaro, so I think we've had a similar conversation on this in Florida when we met. So looking at boxing in the 50s, 60s compared to the present time, we realize that boxing was a very prominent sport in Nigeria in the 50s and 70s. And then in your talk, you made it clear that individual sport was was doing well that period compared to now that the football has taken over. So now, I want to ask now that do you think there's anything that Nigeria can do to resuscitate boxing in Nigeria, or you think that the declining trend will continue like that forever? So, and the same thing we can do. What are your suggestions that that Nigeria can take in place to make boxing come back to life? Thank you. So, Victor, you can start before we go to Michael.
1978, 1977, we failed to qualify for the World Cup due to administrative inefficiency of the Football Federation and corruption. We couldn't qualify, but I didn't say that even when we qualified in 1994, that the same factor was not in place. We were able to surmount all these challenges because of the talents that were at our disposal. What I'm saying is that the talents in Nigeria at our disposal covered other lapses. Look at 2006 when we lost 2006 World Cup. Nigeria played against Angola in Kano, and the NFF president at that time, Sonny Lulu, had to he put the match to, he decided to he transferred the match to Kano. You know, the weather of Kano in Nigeria during the summer. If you look at the match, you see the likes of Okocha Olofijano. They were doing like this, sweating with their hands, like they were before the first half. They were already down, and it was like the man took an important match, a decisive match to his hometown. So what happened? We couldn't beat Angola. We drew 1-1, and we lost our place in Championship 2006. So that's one of the reasons how we usually found one team in global sporting event because of corruption. Like, how could a man schedule the match in his hometown in a decisive match just to satisfy his own or selfish? So our corruption has always been a factor, but in the case of 1994, the talent we had at disposal covered the lapses.
So, Michael, 2 minutes.
So to answer your question, how do we resuscitate boxing today? It's the same as how we would do any sport today, right? It begins at the grassroots level. So it begins with investing into the infrastructure. It requires holding tournaments. It requires, having searching for talent. It requires having local, regional, national championships again and making them a site for people to come and enjoy too, right? So boxing's popularity is both that people come and enjoy it, but that others who become boxers find it to be something viable. And so if you're not making any money as a boxer, you're not going to be a boxer, right? It takes a lot of physical punishment to become one. And so on the world stage, and this is a problem of boxing across the world. It's not just a Nigerian phenomenon, but with the decline in health of Muhammad Ali, the dangers of boxing were brought to the entire world. And so many people saw in the greatest champion of all time such physical and mental decline that didn't seem like something that parents wanted their kids to get into. And it didn't seem like an easy way to move up socially and to leave the country to make a lot of money. The same way that we start seeing in the 1980s and 90s, we start seeing football replace that. But up until the 1960s, boxing was one of the, it was an easier way if you were a really good boxer to do this. And one of the things, and so to answer the question, we resuscitated the same way that boxing became so central in the 1950s and 1960s. There was the boys club movement. So boxing rings were all over the country in these boys clubs. The boys clubs held tournaments. They were amateur fighters. This was a way for the community to support young boys and young men. And it was a way, and it was heralded as something that brought them off the streets. They didn't become Boma boys or Jaguda boys. They were a way to curb this juvenile delinquency that they heralded at the time. But it was a way for young men to come together and play sports that were free or very nearly free to play. And then they created a professional league that you could then graduate into, and you could make money. You would be in the newspapers. And these are all things that really helped boxing grow in the 1960s. And the same thing is really true today. The government investing into the infrastructure, creating both an amateur and a professional circuit that would allow for boxing to grow and become popular once more.
All right, thank you. So any other contribution from the house? Any question? So I think due to the absence of our top presenters, we have more time to inquire. So from our two presenters, do you have any conclusion speech or concluding discussion before we have everything up? That's 2 minutes each. Thank you. So Victor, okay, so do you have anything to wrap up your discussion? You have 2-3 minutes to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's very interesting about this boxing period, at least within Nigeria, we were talking, Victor's talking a lot about the corruption, is that the corruption in football was one of the biggest hindrances in the 1950s and 1960s. And in football itself, the idea of tribalism in football was the reason that Nigerians couldn't win on the world stage. And I gave one example of Dahomey when they tied Dahomey in 1963. But this was a problem well before that. And in the late 1950s and early 60s, football suffers a corruption scandal. The board has to resign. And this is one of the, you can see it playing out in the sports world, what's actually happening at the governmental level as well, too. And so this is one of the reasons why boxing, I think, was so popular, that it wasn't held up by these boards. It wasn't held up by the same corruption. The boxer went in the ring and they did their job and they fought. And when they fought for the country, because the country was on their back. They were representing the country this way. And it's hard for us to imagine here in 2023 how popular boxing was as a sport across the world. Boxing was one of, if not the most popular sports. in the 1950s and 60s. So it's hard to imagine today with how popular football actually is today, because football is everywhere, but it wasn't like that in the 1960s. But boxers and world champions were known worldwide. So if you want to think of how Cristiano Ronaldo or Messi is known today, how their worldwide fame is, that's Muhammad Ali, right? That's Dick Tiger. People knew them based on their fame in boxing. So we have to sort of keep that in mind as well too, that the era has changed. But boxing was really the king of kings in terms of sports.
All right, thank you. So, from what you just discussed now, I've also come across some documents that shows that in the 50s and 70s, sports generally was placed in the hands of region and not at the federal level. So that is why Nigeria was not really doing well throughout the 70s. Now, throughout the 50s and 60s, it was until 1970, after the Civil War, and Nigeria came back to the senses that you should approach sport from the federal level and take it out from the hands of the region. But that was why the National League was introduced in 1972. So, and then looking at the achievement of these boxers in the 50s and 60s, there was no need for any federal support for a boxer or for individual athletes to emerge as champion. So it was very easy for boxers to come up as champion, but for a teamwork like a soccer or any other teamwork, it was very difficult to have a national team in the 50s and 60s until when the Civil War ended and the Nigeria realized their role at the national level to invest more in sport and all that. So thank you for that for the presentation. So within 2-3 minutes, give us your final words.
Based on my interaction with sports writing or Nigerian sport history, I think before we ever think of going back to the golden era of '94, like if you think of going back to the era of '94, we want our team to be stronger. If there is one thing we need to lay emphasis on, that should be corruption. I think the impact of corruption on our sports can never be overemphasized. We look at team selections. We need a coach that can traverse the nook and cranny of the country, search for raw talent, go back to the local league, work on the league, work on the scouting, we discover players. And besides, in my presentation, I failed to acknowledge the contribution of local coaches that were assisting Coach Clemens Westerhoff. Westerhoff wouldn't have been successful as a foreign manager in Nigeria without the likes of Shuaibu Amadu, Christian Chukwu, Willie Bazoye, Tunde Dizu. We remember what Tunde Dizu did in 1989. Nigeria was down by 4 goals to 0 against USSR. Nigeria came back and defeated USSR. Till date is the greatest comeback in the history of football. Shuaibu Amadu won the league with BCC Lions of Boko, won Africa Winners' Cup with BCC Lions of Boko, repeated the same team with the Academy Warriors and another team, like a different 3 teams. It was as at 1990s, Shuaibu Amadu was like the Mourinho of Africa. So all these local coaches, they work hand in hand to assist Clemens Westerhoff in search of good players and to work on the players in the domestic league. But journalists or sports writers have always been silent on the roles of these local coaches, the roles they play in the success of Clemens Westerhoff. So I think that's my observation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for the 2 participants' presentation, and our participants also appreciate you for your presence. So from Victor's work, I just want to make a little contribution. So as I said, the role of the local players, local coaches, and even the local leagues is very, very, very important in any nation that want to be successful at international events. So we realized that in the 70s, Nigeria had a very strong league, 70s and 80s, and that was why they were able to make exploit at the continental event. So in 1976, Nigeria was the first, Shooting Stars of Ibadan was the first team to win the African Winners' Cup. So because of the fact that that period Nigeria had a very strong and very competitive team. So the same thing was in progress in the 70s before they were open to international migration to America, then later to Europe. So if the local team is doing well, obviously it's going to reflect in what we are going to produce at national level. But if you are still having issues battling with local league, it's going to be very difficult for us to attain the peak of football in Nigeria. So with this, I bring this panel to a conclusion. Let's appreciate ourselves and the presenters for the job well done. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank